There's about a dozen different table saw manufacturers on the market today, many of whom have more than one offering, which occasionally change, and of course, sale prices come and go. So reviewing all of them is not really practical. Also, different types of projects require different types of table saws. Someone who's making picture frames and small decorative furniture pieces doesn't need a heavy-duty job site saw. Neither does a tradesman building barns on site need a saw with a rib capacity of only 12 inches. At the same time, some folks may prefer a particular manufacturer over others because of their experiences. For these reasons, I'm going to be approaching this video from a functional standpoint as opposed to a product standpoint. In other words, helping you to realize the table saw features that suit you and your projects best so that you know what to look for when you go to get one. We're going to be looking at things like rib capacity, cutting depth, fence control mechanisms, miter gauge, stands, dust control, and more. And I'm going to be using a number of clips from previous table saw reviews as examples. So let's get started. Most of the table saws on the market today come with 15 amp motors. However, you may run across one that has a 10 or 13 amp motor on eBay or Craigslist. And these typically come with a limited rib capacity. If you're not going to be ripping 2x4s lengthwise or sheets of 3/4 inch plywood, then they might be a good value for you. However, the moment you need the power, it won't be there. So, stick with the 15 amp motors. Cutting depth is an easy feature to overlook when selecting a table saw. If you're going to be cutting sheet goods, 2x, etc., most tables will work for you. However, if you're going to be cutting 4x4s, then you'll need to ensure that you get a saw with a 3.5 inch zero bevel cutting depth. As you can see here with this saw, you'll have to cut twice and be very careful in doing so to get a good clean cut on this 4x4. Table size and extension is another important factor when looking for a table saw. So as you can see here, I've set this up with a 2x4, just wanting to cut off, say, an inch or two. But this particular piece, this workpiece, is only 24 inches long, and as you can see, it's just about off center of gravity, off that right-hand edge. So if you're going to be cutting anything longer, you're going to either have to have someone hold it for you, or you're going to have some kind of table or extension or stand to keep it from falling over and make it stable enough for cutting. Now, I've set up a similar scenario with a longer workpiece with a table saw that has an extension. So again, looking to slice off maybe an inch or two off this 2x4. But this 2x4 is nearly 60 inches long. And with the extension, it's still, the center of gravity is still on the table as opposed to tilting off the table. So even at, I think this was 57 inches, it's still stable enough that you could probably cut this yourself without either having another extension or a stand or someone else to hold it for you. So table size and extensions can make a big difference in your crosscuts. Now let's look at rib capacity. On this smaller table saw, I believe this workpiece is about 12 inches wide, and here in this illustration you could slice off 2 or 3 inches easily. So if you're going to be cutting smaller shelving and that sort of thing, you're going to be ripping narrower pieces, no big deal. I believe the rib capacity on this table saw is about 9 inches, 9 or 10 inches. So not a lot, but if you're doing smaller work pieces, no big deal. Now let's look at a larger workpiece on this same table saw. This side of this workpiece is 24 inches, and as you can see, if you wanted to cut it in half, you really couldn't do so or rip it on this table saw. And when I turn it this way, you can see it's 48 inches, and it's really cumbersome, perhaps even dangerous to do so on a table saw that is this small. So if you're looking to cut some larger sheet goods, then this size table saw may not be a good value for you. Now let's look at that same 48-inch wide workpiece on a wider table saw with a rib capacity of 26¼ inches and see how it works out. So as you can see here, I've got it set up on the table. The center of gravity is still on the table. So cutting sheet goods 48 inches wide on that table saw with this rib capacity is much easier and safer to perform. If you're going to be handling a number of larger workpieces by yourself, you may want to consider a feature called an off-feed extension, like you see at the back of this Hitachi. This makes it easier to handle those larger workpieces and is more likely to keep the center of gravity on the table while you're working. And you can also see the extension, that black bar across the back of this Wen job site saw as well. If you've seen any of my table saw reviews, you know that I've been critical of the quality of the miter gauges that come with even the more expensive job site saws. This one on the left happens to be from a low-end table saw. The gauge is fairly easy to read. It does have slots so you can extend the width of the gauge, and perhaps a hole in the center to add a handle. But this one's rather short, which means accuracy is going to be a little bit off. The one in the center is a little bit longer, but you'll notice the increments are very difficult to read, and there are no slots so that you can extend the width of the miter gauge. It is T-track, but it is a non-standard size. As you can see, this one's much easier to read, and it does have the slot so you can extend the width of the miter gauge and a hole that you can put a handle into. It is T-slot via the little disc at the end here, and it is of a standard size. And if you look on the back, it does have some stops that are built in that are adjustable. And they can be posted to using this little knob. If you're thinking about using a third-party miter gauge, you definitely want to get a saw whose miter slots are of a standard size. There are significant differences between the rip fences found on various table saws. As you can see, the fence on the right has a very small clamping surface. Not a lot to register against the fence control mechanism. This one's a little bit larger, which means it's going to register better against the fence control mechanism and be more accurate. And the one on the left is much larger, is going to register against the fence control mechanism a lot better, be more accurate, and less likely to shift as you lock it down. Now let's look under the hood at all three of these fences. Here again, the one on the right has a very small surface area, and it's all metal-to-metal contact. And as you can see, the one in the center is much larger and has some nylon to make contact with the metal on the fence control mechanism. And finally, the largest of the three. Big difference between these three fences. Now watch the back end of this fence as I try to lock it down. I'm holding it tight against the fence control mechanism, and even though I'm doing so, it still shifts at the very back. Because the clamping area of this fence is small, it doesn't register well against the fence and shifts at the back. So if accuracy is important to you, you may want to get a table saw with a better fence. Just as there's a big difference between fences, there's also a big difference between fence control mechanisms, so let's take a look. So this does have a gauge on the fence that can be adjusted. And you can see the increments on here are small, a little bit more difficult to read than some of the others I'm going to show you. And as we come over to this one, very easy to read gauge, and again it's adjustable. And you'll notice the increments on the fence control mechanism are very easy to read. This saw happens to have an extension, and this is the gauge for the extension. And this one too has a very easy to read gauge on the fence. And the scale on the fence control mechanism is very easy to read, black numbers on a white background. This one also has an extension, and this is the gauge for the extension. Next, I'm going to show you clips from prior table saw reviews that show you how different fence control mechanisms can work for you. Let's take a look at the fence on the Bosch. First of all, it's a single lever for moving it. So all you have to do is pull this up, put it into the position that you want, measure the distance to the blade, and then lock it back in place. You do have this little scale indicator right here that's probably adjustable by about 3/8 of an inch, because you can move this mechanism right here, which I'll show you in a moment. But if I want to extend this all the way out to the right to take advantage of the full 18 inches of the rip capacity, I want to bring this out and lock it down flush with this side. And then there's a red lever here. I'm going to pull this up. What that does is it frees up this mechanism to slide all the way out to the right-hand side. So you do have the ability to adjust this view window here on the scale and the ability to adjust this. I find this a little bit stiff, but that's okay. It keeps it from moving. Once you get it in place, then you go ahead and lock it down. This has a set screw stop underneath here that keeps it from going any further. So right now, in terms of overlap to this track right here, it's just about half. Could you move that set screw out and bring this out a little bit further? Yes, but I don't know what that's going to do to your warranty. Plus, the other thing you got to remember is this track right here and the track on the back side are both plastic. I don't know that I'd want to take that set screw and move it back and put too much force on here, especially if you've got some heavier stock that you're putting on here. This is pretty solid. Once it's locked down, I'm not seeing any wobbling compared to the rest of the table. So keep those things in mind when you look at the Bosch table saw. Let's take a look at the fence on the DeWalt. So there's two ways to change the position of the fence. One is to undo these latches and lift it up and put it into place. Get your location, your distance from the blade, and then latch it back in place. Or if you already have it out here, I've got it splashed out all the way to the end. I can unlock this lever here, and then using the rack and pinion mechanism, I can go back and forth just like you see here. Also, if you have set places either on the right of the blade, right to the blade, or on the left-hand side of the blade, and I'll rack this out here so you see it, you can put these set screws both in the front and the back, and then drop this right over the set screw, and you're going to have the same setting every time. Also, you'll notice on this view window for this scale, these are adjustable right here, so you can adjust this according to how you've adjusted your fence. Okay? So all I have to do is unlock this mechanism here. Using the rack and pinion, I can roll this all the way out. And what I have is just about 23 inches from the blade to the fence. That's an awfully good ripping capacity. Another thing I want to point out while I have this exposed, this track is metal. There's a little plastic sleeve that goes over top of it to make it slide easily. So that's why you're going to see on this mechanism here as opposed to the other, you have a lot less overhang on this or overlap. The other one is probably back at about halfway. On this one it can go a lot further because it's metal. Okay. So this tooth down here stops this from going any further. And this gives you a 23-inch rip capacity with this fence.
The fence control mechanism is fairly easy to use. Pulling up on this lever, you release the extension and you can pull it out and then back in again. Very easy to do with just a couple of fingers. This is the first time I've seen this locking mechanism on the top. On all the other table saws that I've reviewed, it's either been on the front or on the right-hand side. But I do kind of like it on the top. It's easier to get to. If you pull it all the way out to the right, and you use the increments on the scale, it is spot on from the factory. So set at 26 1/4 there and 13 on the right-hand side. It's exactly 26 1/4. So if you're ripping larger pieces of wood, such as 4x8 sheets of plywood, and you need to rip them down, this is very convenient to do. There's probably another 1/8 of an inch of play on the right-hand side that you can pull, but you're going to have to use a scale to measure from the blade to the fence. It's also locking it in place. It's very stable both horizontally and vertically. There's no wobbling. And I'm going to show you something else. When you pull this in and lock it into place, and then you take the fence itself, unlock it, and in this case I'm going to move it over to 10 inches. It is spot on, parallel to the blade, 10 inches all the way up and down. All I have to do is make sure it's registered against the fence control mechanism, and it is absolutely parallel all the way down. Same thing here. If I go to the miter gauge slot and press in, register it against the fence control mechanism, it is absolutely parallel all the way down from the factory. Having sawdust all over your workspace can be a hassle, so you might want to keep dust control in mind when selecting a table saw. On this saw, there's no dust collection. For a shop vac, all the sawdust is going to fall out through the bottom. On this one, it does have a dust control port where you can hook up a shop vac, but there is no dust collection directly off the blade, so a lot comes off the bottom. Okay? And then on this one, finally, there is a dust control port for a vacuum, and there is a cowling around the blade to capture the sawdust. So there's basically 3 different levels of dust control for you to choose from. Most table saws come equipped with a general purpose blade, such as the ones you see here. This one on the left happens to be a 24-tooth blade. And the one on the right happens to be a 36-tooth blade. If you're going to be doing high precision wood cutting, you probably want to go to a higher tooth blade. I put a link in the description below to a video I did on selecting the right type of blade for your work and your saw. If you're going to be doing non-through cuts, such as dados or rabbets, you're going to want to look for a saw that will accommodate a dado stack, such as the one you see here, as well as a throat plate that will accommodate the dado stack. So you can find this information in the manuals online. So download the PDF of the manual and do a search on dado, and it'll tell you whether the shaft or the arbor on the saw that you're looking at will accommodate a dado stack. If you're looking for a saw with a stand, there's several things to keep in mind. So let's look at 2 of them right here. So the one on the right has a foldable stand, and it does detach. So if you see this little white knob on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, there's 4 of them all the way around. And all you have to do is turn those knobs, and then that entire saw lifts off the stand and then stores underneath those straps on the back. So if you need to store it away or you need to make it portable, that's the way to go. This stand is a little bit more permanent. It can be folded up, but you'll notice instead of little knobs to take it off, you're going to have to take a, I think that's a Phillips head screwdriver to take that off, and of course a socket wrench on the bottom to take the nut off. So 2 different approaches to stands for those that you're going to keep in your shop. There are also job site saws that come with stands that are equipped with wheels, so you can collapse the stand and roll the saw to wherever you want it in your shop or at the job site. If you're going to be moving your table saw around to any degree, weight becomes a serious consideration. The Harbor Freight weighs in at 43 pounds, the Ryobi weighs in at 50 pounds, and the Rigid weighs in at a hefty 54 pounds. Job site saws with rolling stands such as these can weigh upwards of 100 pounds, so keep that in mind when you're looking at your table saw choice. Well, we've covered a lot of material in this video. If you have any questions about what I've covered, please leave your questions in the comments below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I've put the links to all my table saw reviews in the description below, so make sure you check them out. If you found this video useful, please press like and share with your friends. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you as a subscriber. Thanks for watching, and as always, good luck on your projects.